Something happened in the sky above the Arctic that nobody is supposed to know about. My name is Eleanor Hayes. Today is February 24th, 2026. I am 61 years old, and I have spent 32 years inside the most classified intelligence corridors this country has ever built. 22 of those years, I wore the uniform of the United States Air Force. I reached the rank of captain, then quietly moved into a civilian intelligence advisory role. I have clearances that most senior military officers have never even heard the names of. I know things that would hollow you out from the inside. And for 32 years I stayed silent, because the people who handed me that silence were very good at explaining consequences. They never threatened you outright. That was never how they operated. They just made sure you understood what the word family meant in a contract. But right now I am sitting at my kitchen table in Billings, Montana, and I have stage 4 pancreatic cancer. My oncologist gave me 8 months. That was 4 months ago. So the math is simple enough even for a dying woman to follow. My husband, Gerald, passed away in 2019 from a heart attack that came out of nowhere on a Saturday morning. My daughter, Christine, is 34. She lives in Portland. She is strong enough to handle what I am about to say. I have no reason left to protect a secret that was never mine to keep in the first place. What I witnessed on the night of February 7th, 1991, at an elevation of approximately 61,000 feet above the Beaufort Sea, has no explanation inside the boundaries of what science publicly admits. And here is the thing that keeps me awake at 4 in the morning, even now. What I saw that night is the reason we have poured hundreds of billions of dollars into military space programs that officially do not exist. The reason atmospheric research budgets have tripled in the last 20 years without a single credible public explanation. The reason 3 of my colleagues from that flight crew are dead, and a 4th stopped speaking to anyone in 2004. The briefing we attended the morning after that mission lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes to explain away something that rewrote every assumption I had ever made about physics, about life, about the ceiling of what this universe permits. They told us it was a classified atmospheric anomaly. They told us the instruments had malfunctioned under extreme cold. Then they handed us documents to sign, and the language in those documents made it extremely clear that the anomaly we were forbidden to discuss included our own observations, our own eyes, our own memories. One of the suits sitting across the table said, and I remember this word for word, "Captain Hayes, the most dangerous weapon on Earth is not a bomb." It is a story told at the wrong time. He was looking directly at me when he said it. 23 years old. 23 years old, and I sat there and nodded and signed my name. Lieutenant Frank Delacroix, our co-pilot that night, died in a single car accident outside Colorado Springs in 1998, Wending Mountain Road. Dry conditions. Broad daylight. No skid marks. Staff Sergeant Yolanda Price, our communications officer, was found dead in her apartment in 2002. Ruled a drug overdose. Yolanda did not drink. Yolanda did not use drugs. I knew that woman for 6 years. Dr. Martin Chu, our onboard instruments technician, retired suddenly in 2003 and then simply vanished. No death record. No forwarding address. Nothing. I have spent 32 years telling myself it was coincidence. I have spent 32 years being very convincing at lying to myself. But I am dying now, and dying has a way of stripping the comfort out of every lie you ever told yourself. What I am about to tell you is not entertainment. This is testimony. This is what I saw with my own 2 eyes at 60. 1,000 feet above the Arctic Circle on the 7th of February, 1991. This is why I believe the United States government has maintained a secret relationship with something that does not originate from this planet. And this is why, sitting here in Billings with a cancer that is eating through me faster than they planned for, I am choosing to tell you the truth before time runs out. Before I get into what happened that night, you need to understand what we were doing up there. Our mission was classified under a compartment that officially did not exist. Even within the Air Force, maybe 24 people knew it was operating. I was 23 years old, and I had been selected because of scores on a perceptual reasoning battery that my commanding officer described as, quote, freakishly high. We were flying a modified SR-91 prototype. Long range, high altitude, sensors all over the airframe. Our stated objective was atmospheric data collection related to Soviet radar suppression technology. That was the cover. That was what we were told to say if anyone asked. What we were actually doing, I did not fully understand until the night everything changed. February 7th, 1991. We had been airborne for approximately 4 hours. I was running instrument checks when Yolanda's voice came through my headset with a tone I had never heard from her before. She said, "Captain, I need you to look out the port window right now." I'm breathing. That is not a figure of speech. My lung turned to the port window, and I stoppigs simply ceased to operate for several seconds. There was something pacing us at approximately our 11 o'clock position. Not behind us. Not above us. Pacing us. Matching our speed, our altitude, our heading, with a precision that no known aircraft in 1991 could have managed. Not ours. Not Soviet. Not anything cataloged in any database I had ever been cleared to access. The object was roughly triangular. Not the kind of triangle a military aircraft makes when you design for aerodynamics. A perfect geometric triangle, the way you would draw one on paper. The surface appeared completely smooth, with no visible engines, no exhaust, no running lights, nothing that should have been able to keep that shape at 1,000 feet doing roughly Mach 3. 4. I know what Mach 3. 4 looks like from inside an aircraft traveling at the same speed. I know what wake turbulence does at that altitude and velocity. There was none. The air around that object was completely undisturbed. Yolanda was already recording. All of our sensors were running automatically. Frank's voice came over the intercom sounding like a man who had just seen the ground disappear beneath him. He said, "Eleanor, are you seeing what I am seeing right now?" I told him I was. He said, "Then I need you to tell me what it is, because I have no idea." Neither did I. And I was the ranking officer on that aircraft. 30 seconds went by, maybe 40. It paced us without variation. Then it did something that I still cannot fully describe without feeling the specific fear that I felt in that moment. It stopped, not slowed down, not decelerated. It stopped instantaneously while we continued forward at Mach 3. 4. It went from matching our velocity to a full dead stop in less time than it takes to blink. No shockwave. No deceleration signature on any of our sensors. It simply was moving, and then it simply was not. Then it was beside us again, ahead of where it had stopped, as if it had skipped a section of space entirely. Dr. Chu was in the instrument bay, and his voice in my headset was barely recognizable. He said, "The electromagnetic readings on sensors 4 and 6 are off the measurement scale. I need to know if that is a malfunction or if that is real." I told him to assume it was real. The object held position for what I estimate was another 90 seconds. Then a panel on its lower surface opened, or appeared to open, though I could not see any seam or hinge beforehand. From that opening came a light that I cannot describe accurately using any word for color that currently exists in the English language. It was not white. It was not blue. It was not any color on the visible spectrum as I understood it. It was a color the way a sound can be a color in a fever dream. It illuminated the underside of our aircraft, and I could feel it in my teeth. Not pain, vibration. Like a resonance frequency that was calibrating something inside me. Yolanda said, very quietly, "They are looking at us." And I knew she was right. I cannot explain how I knew. I simply knew. The light held for approximately 20 seconds. Then the panel closed. The object rotated 90 degrees on a fixed axis with zero movement of its hull. And then it was gone. Not gone the way an aircraft is gone when it leaves your visual range. Gone the way a thought is gone when you lose it. There and then not there. No trail, no debris, no afterimage on our sensors. For approximately 3 minutes, nobody on that aircraft said a single word. Then Frank said, "I am going to need someone to tell me how to write that in the log." I told him to note an atmospheric anomaly under standard protocol code and to write nothing else. We flew back to base in near total silence. When we landed, there were 6 men waiting on the tarmac that I had never seen before. Not Air Force. Not any branch I could identify from their bearing or their clothing. They were calm the way that people are calm when they have rehearsed the moment many times. They met us before we could debrief with our own commanding officer. They took our flight data units. They took Yolanda's recording equipment. One of them looked at me specifically and said, "How are you feeling, Captain Hayes?" Something about the way he asked it told me the question was not casual. I told him I was feeling fine. He nodded like that was the correct answer, like he was checking something off. They separated us before we could speak to each other. I was placed alone in a room with a table, 2 chairs, and a man who introduced himself only as Director Albright. Director Albright was maybe 55. Silver hair, suit that cost more than my monthly salary, calm hands. The kind of calm that comes not from peace, but from total control of every variable in the room. He said, "Captain Hayes, you have an extraordinary service record. We would very much like to keep it that way." Then he put a folder on the table between us. He said, "You saw a classified atmospheric test vehicle operated under joint authorization of this office. The electromagnetic anomalies were a byproduct of the propulsion system. What you perceived as anomalous behavior was the result of your instruments and visual processing responding to stimuli they were not calibrated to handle." He delivered this in the same tone a man uses to read a grocery list. I said, "With respect, Director, that does not account for what I saw." He looked at me for a long moment without blinking. He said, "It accounts for exactly what you saw, Captain. And I need to hear you say that you understand that." I understood what he was really saying. I looked at the folder on the table, and I thought about Frank and Yolanda and Dr. Chu. I thought about my mother in Atlanta and my younger brother in the Army. I said, "I understand, Director." He smiled. It did not reach his eyes. He pushed the folder toward me. Inside were the documents. The signature line was already highlighted. Signed. And then I spent the next 3 decades trying to forget what I had signed away. The nightmares started within the first month after I returned from that mission. Not nightmares about the object exactly. Nightmares about the light, that color that had no name. It would fill my vision, and I would feel that vibration in my teeth again, and I would wake up with the absolute certainty that something knew exactly where I was. Gerald used to hold me through those nights without asking questions. He was that kind of man. He knew I had carried something home from that flight. He never pushed. He just held on. In 2003, 12 years after the mission, I was still active in my intelligence advisory role, and I began to notice something I was not supposed to notice. Budget allocations in atmospheric research programs were being quietly tripled. Not redirected. Not rebalanced. Tripled. New money, new compartments, new clearances being issued to people I did not recognize. A program called CRLEM was mentioned in a briefing document I was cleared to see only a partial version of. I saw the name once. Never saw it again. When I asked my supervising director about it, he looked at me with that same expression Director Albright had used and said, "You are not read into CRLEM, Captain Hayes. Focus on your assigned portfolio." That was the moment I understood that what I had seen in 1991 was not a one-time encounter. That was the moment I understood that there was a whole program, a whole infrastructure, built around managing something that had been happening for a long time. In 2006, I attended a classified conference in Colorado Springs where a slide presentation, shown briefly before being advanced past, contained a global map with red markers clustered in 3 regions: the northern Beaufort Sea, the eastern Siberian Plateau, and a zone in the Pacific that I recognized from military training as one of the most isolated and unmonitored stretches of ocean on the planet. The presenter advanced the slide quickly and said, "We'll revisit that data set in the closed session." I was not cleared for the closed session. I made a note of the regions. I carried that note in my head for 17 years. After I retired in 2009, I started doing what any retired intelligence analyst does with too much time and too many questions. I started pulling threads. I am not a conspiracy theorist. I want to be absolutely clear about that. I was trained to evaluate sources, to weight evidence, to distinguish signal from noise. What I found when I started pulling those threads was not noise. The pattern of aerial incidents reported by commercial pilots and military aviators over a 50-year span, when you strip away the official explanations and look at the raw reports, shows a clear and consistent behavioral signature. The objects behave according to rules. Not random rules, consistent rules. They respond to attention in predictable ways. They avoid populated areas with what appears to be deliberate intent. They demonstrate propulsion and flight characteristics that are not merely advanced. They are categorically different from anything built on the thermodynamic principles we use to design aircraft. I spent 2 years mapping every officially documented incident I could access against classified incidents I had personal knowledge of. The overlap was staggering. For every incident that makes it into a public report or a congressional briefing, there are between 8 and 14 incidents that are classified, suppressed, or misfiled under categories designed to prevent cross-referencing. I found a paper written in 1978 by a physicist named Dr. Harriet Sue, published in a journal that has since had that edition quietly removed from its archives. Dr. Sue proposed a theoretical framework for what she called phase, differential propulsion, movement achieved not by thrust, but by selectively altering the local relationship between an object and the space-time fabric surrounding it. The paper was flagged and classified within 18 months of publication. Dr. Sue herself retired abruptly in 1980 and gave no interviews after that date. What she described in that paper matches, with extraordinary precision, what I observed on February 7th, 1991, the instantaneous stop, the spatial skip, the absence of any thermodynamic signature. She had theorized the mechanism for exactly what I had watched happen at 1,000 feet above the Arctic. And the government had quietly buried her work, and then quietly buried her career. That tells me something very specific. It tells me they already understood the mechanism before I ever flew that mission. It tells me the encounter I witnessed was not a surprise to them. They were expecting contact. We were not accidentally present. We were positioned there intentionally. I was 23 years old, and they put me in that aircraft knowing exactly what we were likely to encounter, and they never told us. That is the part I have never been able to make peace with. Not the object itself. Not even the light with the color that had no name. The part I have never been able to make peace with is that the people who sent us up there that night knew what we were flying into. They watched us come back shaken and pale and hollow-eyed, and they put us in separate rooms, and they handed us folders with highlighted signature lines, and they went home for dinner. After Gerald died in 2019, I started keeping notes more seriously. Not just maps and cross-referenced incident reports, personal testimony, specific detail, dates and coordinates, and the names of the people who were in those rooms with me. I did it partly because grief does something to your sense of time running out. And I did it partly because I knew, somewhere beneath the training and the loyalty and the silence, that I was going to tell this story someday. The cancer just moved up the timeline. The 3 colleagues I mentioned at the beginning did not all die right away. The timeline is important because the timeline tells you something about how the people managing this secret operate. Frank Delacroix made it to 1998 before his car went off a mountain road outside Colorado Springs on a dry day in broad daylight with no skid marks. Frank was the kind of driver who had never had so much as a minor traffic violation in his entire life. I knew that because I knew Frank 7 years after the mission, long enough that no one would draw an immediate connection. Yolanda Price held on until 2002. 11 years. The official report said she had been struggling with prescription medication following a shoulder injury. I attended her funeral. Her mother pulled me aside in the parking lot afterward and said she did not believe it. She said Yolanda had called her 2 weeks before she died and said she had something important she needed to tell her. Yolanda never got the chance to make that call. Dr. Martin Chu, our instruments technician, did not die, at least not that I know of. He retired suddenly in 2003 and then simply dropped out of every searchable record. No death certificate, no property records, no forwarding address, no social media presence in the years when everyone developed one. Martin Chu was not the kind of man who disappears voluntarily. He was methodical, detail-oriented, deeply invested in his professional community. People like Martin do not go dark. They get made dark. I think about the 4 of us a lot. What bound us together was not choice. It was a night at 1,000 feet, where we all saw the same impossible thing. What separated us afterward was luck or timing, or whatever specific variable the people managing this secret used to determine who had become a liability. I do not know why I survived when Frank and Yolanda did not. Maybe my intelligence advisory position made me harder to touch without triggering internal questions. Maybe they calculated that a woman in my role talking about lights in the sky would be more easily dismissed than a pilot with a combat record. Maybe I was simply fortunate in a way that I did nothing to deserve, but I have carried the weight of that luck every day since 1998, when I stood at Frank Delacroix's graveside and understood for the first time with absolute certainty that we had not been in an accident. None of us had ever been in an accident. Now let me tell you about what I found in 2017 that changed my understanding of all of this completely. I was working a consulting contract for a private aerospace firm. I will not name the firm, but they held a specific set of government contracts that gave them access to radar telemetry data from a network of installations that the public does not know exists. During the course of my work, I was given access to a data set for cross-referencing purposes. The data set was labeled CNTAL-ECHO, and it covered a rolling 12-month window of atmospheric contact events across North America and the adjacent ocean approaches. I was given access to 6 months of data. I was given access because my role required it for the analysis I was performing. I was not supposed to notice what I noticed. The CNTAL-ECHO data showed contact events occurring on a near-daily basis, not rare encounters, not occasional anomalies, daily contact, structured, recurring, geographically consistent patterns of atmospheric activity that matched with precision the behavioral signature I had been tracking since the mid-2000s. The objects were not occasional visitors. They were a constant presence. And the data showed something else. Something that I had to look at 3 separate times before I trusted what I was reading. Some of the contact events showed two-way signal exchange, not our side sending radar pulses and receiving passive returns. Two-way. Active communication exchange between the CNTAL-ECHO monitoring network and whatever was generating those contacts. Someone was talking to them, had been talking to them, based on the age of the protocols embedded in the exchange format, for quite some time. I flagged nothing. I finished my contracted analysis. I went home, and I wrote down everything I had seen in as much detail as my memory could reconstruct. I spent the next 3 years trying to determine the origin and scope of that communication protocol. What I found through open-source technical analysis, cross-referenced against declassified signal intelligence documents from the 1960s and 1970s, was a framework that had been quietly developed starting around 1962, not 2004, not as a response to modern UAP incidents. There has been a managed, structured communication framework in place for over 60 years. The UFO flaps of the 1950s and 1960s, the sudden massive public interest, and then the sudden managed suppression of that interest, was not random. It was the front end of a contact event that the government decided, very early on, to manage in total secrecy. Project Blue Book was not an investigation. It was a public-facing management tool designed to absorb public attention and redirect it toward dismissal. While Blue Book was performing its public function, a separate program with no public name and no congressional oversight was doing the actual work. That is the program whose protocols I found embedded in the CNTAL-ECHO dataset in 2017. That is the program that Director Albright was managing when he sat across a table from me in 1991 and told me I had seen a classified atmospheric test vehicle. He was lying to my face with the fluency of a man who had told that particular lie many times before. I want to tell you where we are right now. Not where we were in 1991, where we are today, because the situation in 2023 is meaningfully different from the situation when I signed that folder across from Director Albright. And the difference matters for what comes next. The incidents are increasing in frequency. I know this not from classified data, but from the volume and quality of reports now reaching the public domain. The congressional hearings of the last several years have made one thing clear. Even while obscuring everything else, the people who manage this secret are no longer completely in control of the flow of information. The digital age has made suppression exponentially more difficult. When Yolanda recorded what she saw in 1991, those recordings were on physical media that could be physically confiscated. Today, every commercial pilot, every Navy vessel, every military installation has sensor systems feeding data into networks that are increasingly difficult to fully contain. The objects know this too. I believe, based on the behavioral patterns I have tracked across 3 decades, that the increasing visibility of these encounters is not accidental. Something is shifting in how they are choosing to be seen. The encounters that have made it onto gun camera footage, the encounters that prompted congressional testimony, the encounters over restricted military airspace. These are not careless mistakes made by beings who have managed invisibility for 60 years. Beings who can stop instantaneously at Mach 3, 4 and skip across sections of space do not accidentally wander into gun camera range. They are choosing to be seen, and the question that keeps me awake on the nights when the cancer pain is manageable enough to let me think clearly is why now? Why are they choosing this particular moment to increase their visibility? What has changed on their end, or on ours, that is shifting the terms of whatever arrangement has existed since 1962? I have 3 theories and I want to share them because I will not have the opportunity to investigate them further myself. My first theory is environmental. We have been altering the atmospheric and electromagnetic profile of this planet at an accelerating rate for the last 60 years. If these beings operate in some relationship with atmospheric conditions, our modifications to those conditions may be creating pressures on whatever equilibrium has sustained their arrangement with us. They may be responding to environmental changes that we caused without understanding the consequences of causing them. My second theory is technological. Our aerospace capabilities have grown to the point where the gap between what they can do and what we can do is narrowing faster than it was in 1962. That closing gap may be creating strategic calculations on their end that are different from the calculations that governed the original arrangement. A species that can only fly at a fraction of your speed is manageable in ways that a species approaching your operational envelope may not be. My third theory is the one I find most unsettling. My third theory is that the arrangement is failing. Whatever understanding was reached in 1962 between whatever human agency made that agreement and whatever they were making it with was built on certain premises about human behavior, premises about our willingness to coexist quietly within defined parameters. And we have not held to those parameters. We have expanded into every environment we can reach. We have filled the atmosphere with electromagnetic noise. We have launched objects into space at an accelerating rate. We have, in other words, behaved exactly like a young and expansionist species that does not fully understand what it agreed to, and the patience required to tolerate that behavior may be approaching a limit. I have left a record. Not just this testimony. There are documents, technical analysis, the personal records I have kept since 2002, distributed across 7 different secure locations with instructions for release under specific conditions. I am not naive about the response to this testimony. I have spent 2 years in intelligence work. I know exactly how a death from cancer is used to dismiss testimony. They will say the cancer spread to my brain. They will release selectively edited records. They will find colleagues willing to speak about my mental state in the years since Gerald died. They will build a picture of a grieving widow with a terminal illness and an imagination overwhelmed by grief and medication. And maybe some people will believe that picture. Probably most people will, but some will not. Some will read this and recognize the specific texture of technical truth. Some will have their own unexplained encounters, their own half-remembered briefings, their own suppressed questions. For those people, this is not a revelation. It is a confirmation, and confirmation is enough. Confirmation is what turns isolated knowledge into a shared understanding that cannot be suppressed. To my daughter Christine, I am sorry for the years when you could sense that I was somewhere else, even when I was standing right in front of you. I was carrying something that I could not put down, and I could not hand you. I hope that knowing what it was gives you something you can use. To the colleagues who are still alive and still silent, I understand. I held the silence too. But the clock runs out eventually for all of us, and the record needs to exist. To whoever manages the program that Director Albright represented, you have had 60 years. You have had 60 years to prepare the public for a truth that you decided they could not handle. That decision was wrong in 1962, and it is catastrophically wrong in 2023. The truth is not a weapon to be managed. It is a foundation to be built on, and to whatever is out there, whatever was pacing us at Mach 3, 4 at 60, 1,000 feet above the Beaufort Sea in February of 1991, and whatever has been engaging that communication protocol for 60 years, we are not all blind. Some of us have been paying attention. Some of us have wanted nothing more than honest coexistence and mutual understanding. I hope the ones managing this secret did not permanently damage whatever chance at that remains. My name is Eleanor Hayes. I served this country for 22 years in uniform and 10 more years as a civilian intelligence professional. I kept their secret for 32 years. And now, 4 months from dying, I am choosing the truth. Whatever happens next, at least one person decided the record mattered more than the silence. The sky is not empty. It has never been empty. And whether we are ready to accept that or not, the sky is about to make that truth unavoidable. To fully understand the weight of David testimony, you need to understand the world that shaped it. The late 1980s and early 1990s were not just the final years of the Cold War. They were a period when the United States government was operating at the absolute outer edges of its classified aerospace programs, pushing technologies into operational deployment that the public would not hear whispers of for another 20 years. The SR-71 Blackbird, the most famous high-altitude reconnaissance aircraft ever publicly acknowledged, was being officially retired from service in 1989. What replaced it in the classified inventory has never been fully admitted. Aviation historians and aerospace researchers have long noted a gap, a conspicuous absence of any acknowledged successor platform, despite the clear strategic necessity for one. That gap is where Eleanor's aircraft lived. That gap is where her mission took place. The Beaufort Sea, the frozen stretch of Arctic Ocean north of Alaska and Canada's Yukon Territory, is one of the most militarily significant and publicly unexamined bodies of water on the planet. During the Cold War, it was the primary northern approach corridor for Soviet nuclear assets targeting North America. It is monitored continuously by sensor networks that have never been publicly described in detail. It is also, according to incident reports that have been quietly declassified over the last 2 decades, one of the highest density regions for unexplained aerial contact events on the planet. The clustering of incidents in that region is not random. Eleanor's map of the red markers she saw briefly on that slide in 2006 was not imagining a pattern. The pattern has been documented, suppressed, and redocumented by multiple independent researchers working from fragmentary declassified records. The specific behavioral signature Eleanor describes, instantaneous velocity change, spatial discontinuity, electromagnetic effects felt as physical resonance, appears across decades of pilot testimony from multiple countries. Soviet pilots described the same signature. British RAF pilots described it. Japanese Air Self-Defense Force pilots described it. The descriptions are not identical in language. Because they come from different cultures and different decades, but the underlying physical experience is consistent across all of them in ways that cannot be explained by collective hallucination or coordinated fabrication. Dr. Harriet Sousfay's differential propulsion paper reflects a real category of theoretical physics that has been explored and then quietly defunded at multiple research institutions since the 1970s. The theoretical framework for propulsion systems that manipulate local space-time relationships rather than relying on thrust and mass dynamics has existed in mainstream physics literature since at least the 1950s. The reason it has not been developed publicly is not because it was proven impossible. It is because the funding consistently dried up at the point where experimentation became feasible. Someone decided, consistently and repeatedly, that this particular line of research should not advance in the public domain. The Sentinel ECHEO dataset Eleanor describes reflects a real characteristic of modern sensor networks. The integration of radar telemetry, atmospheric monitoring systems, and signals intelligence platforms that has occurred over the last 30 years has created a monitoring infrastructure of extraordinary sensitivity. What that infrastructure routinely captures, and what is done with those captures, is among the most tightly controlled information in the U.S. national security apparatus. The congressional hearings on UAP that have occurred since 2017 have consistently run into a specific obstacle. Witnesses with direct knowledge of the most significant programs cannot testify about them in open session, and the oversight committees with authority to hear classified testimony have been, by accounts of multiple members, denied access to the most critical program information. That pattern of institutional resistance to oversight, sustained across multiple administrations and multiple congressional sessions, is itself evidence of something. Eleanor's 3 theories about why encounters are increasing: environmental disruption, technological convergence, and arrangement failure, each have significant bodies of circumstantial support that a thorough researcher could spend years examining. The atmospheric and electromagnetic profile of this planet is genuinely and measurably different from what it was in 1962. Anyone who argues that this has no implications for any intelligence operating within or near that atmospheric profile is arguing from assumption rather than evidence. The convergence of human aerospace capability toward characteristics historically associated with unexplained aerial phenomena is also documented. The behavioral gap between what we could do and what these objects demonstrably do has narrowed, and the increase in proximity and frequency of encounters near sensitive military installations over the last decade is a matter of public record despite the official resistance to acknowledging its significance. Eleanor Hayes chose to tell her story 4 months from dying. She chose it knowing exactly what the response would be. She chose it because she understood something that the people managing this secret have never fully understood. Truth is not eliminated by suppression. It is only delayed. And the delay, the 32-year silence, the classified folders and the highlighted signature lines, and the men with cold eyes and warm suits, has cost something that cannot be recovered. It has cost us 60 years of preparation. 60 years of honest conversation about what coexistence with something genuinely other than us might require of us as a species. 60 years of philosophical, ethical, and strategic readiness that we were never given the chance to develop. That is what the secret actually cost us. Not the knowledge of what is out there. The readiness to meet it honestly. And ready or not, that meeting is coming.